Clara Whitmore grips her grandmother's fragile hand as the family gathers for Edward Whitmore's funeral. When her estranged parents arrive late, smiling as if they owned the place. The service had already begun. The minister's voice carried through the old wooden beams of Whitmore Family Church, his words heavy with reverence for a man everyone in Ashford had admired. Yet Clara felt her chest tighten, not at the sermon, but at the sight of Gregory and Diane sweeping in through the side door, Sabrina trailing behind them. They looked less like mourners than uninvited guests. Gregory's suit was flashy, his cufflinks glinting in the dim light, while Diane adjusted her pearl necklace with a theatrical sigh, as though the service were staged for her performance. Clara lowered her eyes, but the weight of their arrival pressed against her like a storm cloud. She remembered Edward's last words to her in the hospital only weeks ago. "Protect the house, Clara. It's not money, it's our family's soul." The memory echoed like a bell, anchoring her even as her parents slid into the pew behind her. Their presence, late and ostentatious, was a foreshadowing of the conflict yet to come. The chapter of her life that opened here was not only about grief, it was about protection, about betrayal waiting just beneath the black coats and polished smiles. The church smelled faintly of wax and lilies. Neighbors filled the pews with quiet sympathy. Old friends clasped their hands in prayer. Evelyn, frail and confused by her fading memory, sat beside Clara, humming a hymn under her breath, though the choir had long finished. Clara tucked her arm protectively around her grandmother, aware of Diane's watchful eyes darting toward them. When the minister invited the family to speak, Clara rose. Her hands trembled as she held Edward's old pocket watch, the chain coiled tightly in her palm. She spoke of his honesty, his laughter in the garden, his nightly ritual of reading aloud from Dickens by the fire. She spoke of the lessons he had carved into her life, that loyalty mattered more than wealth, that a person's word was worth more than gold. As she spoke, her voice steadied, filling the church with warmth. Gregory did not join her at the lectern. He whispered impatiently to Diane, who fanned herself with the funeral program. Sabrina scrolled briefly on her phone before catching Clara's glare and slipping it away. After the service, mourners gathered in the hall, where the scent of strong coffee mixed with the sugar of lemon bars brought by neighbors. Clara poured tea for Evelyn, who nibbled quietly at a cookie, eyes wandering the room as if searching for Edward among the guests. It was then that Gregory cornered her. "When will the will be read?" His voice was low but sharp, the tone of a man already calculating. Clara straightened. "This isn't the place," she said, her grief still raw. But Gregory pressed on, his jaw tight. "We deserve to know what's next. Your grandfather would have wanted transparency." Behind him, Diane moved silently through the reception, pausing at the table where family photographs had been arranged. She bent over, smiling sweetly at neighbors, but Clara caught her hand drifting toward Evelyn's handbag left unattended on the chair. Later, when the crowd thinned, she saw Diane slide something folded into her purse paper, not hers to take. Sabrina, meanwhile, perched on the arm of a chair, surveying the grand wood-paneled room. "This house is even bigger than I remembered," she said aloud, earning an indulgent smile from her mother. "Clara, don't you ever feel lonely here? A place like this, it should belong to all of us, not just you." Clara's hand tightened around her grandmother's. It belonged to Grandpa, and now it belongs to his memory. The afternoon waned, shadows stretching across the polished floorboards. The neighbors began to leave, carrying casseroles back to their cars. Clara stood by the window, watching the family she barely trusted move freely about her grandparents' home as though it were already theirs. She felt the first prickle of fear and anger coil together, a storm forming in her chest. Gregory's impatience simmered into open rudeness. "You'll call us about the paperwork," he muttered, not asking, but demanding. Diane avoided Clara's gaze, but her purse bulged with whatever she had taken from the study. Sabrina's eyes gleamed as though she had already tasted the inheritance she thought inevitable. As the final car pulled away, silence wrapped around the estate. Evelyn dozed softly in her chair, a blanket around her shoulders, whispering Edward's name in her sleep. Clara looked at her parents, at her sister, and felt the weight of Edward's watch in her hand. Protect the house. His voice lived in her, but protection meant vigilance, and vigilance meant knowing what shadows moved beneath the surface. And already she had seen too much: her father's greed, her mother's quiet theft, her sister's casual entitlement. The Whitmore estate was more than property. It was a battlefield, and the war had just begun. Clara notices Diane slip a folded paper into her purse, something taken from Evelyn's study during the funeral reception. Late one night, Clara overhears her parents in the garden, their voices low but sharp. Once Evelyn is gone, we move quickly before Clara has time to block us. The words cut through the stillness like a blade, jolting Clara awake from her restless sleep. She had not intended to eavesdrop. She had risen to fetch a glass of water from the kitchen, her grandmother's cough echoing faintly down the hallway, when she noticed the glow of a cigarette outside and her father's distinct cadence riding on the night air. Clara froze by the open window, her heart hammering. It was as if every warning her grandfather had whispered before his death was unfolding right there, under the cover of moonlight. Her law professors had spoken often of betrayal within families. Most theft comes from blood, they had said in classrooms lined with case files, voices echoing with authority. At the time, Clara had wondered if they were exaggerating, trying to drive home a lesson through fear. Now, hearing her own father plot in hushed tones, she realized those lectures had been prophetic. The real battle was not grief, it was survival. The goal of this moment was clear: to understand her family's intent and prepare for what was coming. And Clara knew now, without doubt, that they would not hesitate to destroy her if it meant lining their pockets with the Whitmore legacy. The estate lay hushed around her, the Victorian walls soaked in shadows. Outside, the garden stretched under a pale moon, roses nodding in the breeze, stone paths leading to the wrought iron gate where Clara had once played hide-and-seek with Sabrina as children. But the innocence of those games was long gone. The Whitmore estate was no longer a playground. It was a vault of wealth and history, a prize for which her parents were willing to conspire. Gregory's voice carried first. The house alone is worth over $3 million. Add the antiques, the land. We could sell quickly, invest, finally live the life we deserve. Diane's sharper tone followed. We cannot wait. Evelyn is slipping. We put papers in front of her while she is confused, and she will sign. She has always trusted us. By the time Clara even suspects, we will have filed everything. Clara's breath caught, her hand tightening against the window frame. She wanted to storm outside, to expose their greed in the moment, but instinct held her still. She knew enough about strategy to realize silence was more powerful than outrage. Sabrina's voice then rose, lighter, eager. There are pieces in the attic that could fetch a fortune: grandmother's jewelry, the old clocks, even the silver tea set. I checked last week. They will go fast at auction. Clara's stomach twisted. She remembered Sabrina at 15, sneaking coins from her piggy bank, always dismissing it as a joke. But this was no childish theft. This was plotting on a grand scale, with no shame, no hesitation. She pulled out her phone, the screen glowing faintly, and pressed record. Their voices entered the device, preserved in the cold honesty of digital memory. It was not a complete confession, but it was proof enough to confirm the betrayal was real, not paranoia. From her hiding place, she listened as Gregory lowered his voice, though his words still cut through the dark. If Clara resists, we will smear her. We will say she manipulated them, that she used her law degree to control everything. Judges will believe us over her. We are the children. She is just the grandchild who benefited from their favoritism. Diane chuckled softly. She is green, Gregory. A new lawyer with no experience. She cannot fight us all. Sabrina's laugh joined theirs, cruel in its naivety. Clara stepped back from the window, the glass of water trembling in her hand, warmth slipping through her fingers as condensation dripped down. She retreated to her room, heart pounding so hard she feared it might wake Evelyn in the next room. She sat at her desk, journal open, pen scratching furiously as she recorded every word she had heard. If her family thought she was naive, they were wrong. She had grown up with Edward's stories of integrity and Evelyn's lessons in independence. This estate was not just a house, it was the heartbeat of generations, and she would not let it be stolen. An hour passed before the sound of footsteps returned indoors. Gregory's heavy tread on the staircase, Diane's murmured complaints about the damp air, Sabrina's giggle fading down the hall. The house grew quiet once more, though Clara felt no peace. She paced her bedroom, replaying their words, weighing her next move. Her phone, now holding their recorded voices, lay on the desk beside Edward's old watch. She whispered aloud, "You were right, Grandpa. I see it now." Sleep was impossible. Instead, Clara sat in the dim lamplight, documenting everything: her father's mention of fraudulent sales, her mother's plan to exploit Evelyn's confusion, Sabrina's gleeful catalog of valuables. She tucked the journal beneath a stack of law books, ensuring it would not be easily found. The night pressed on, crickets humming beyond the windows, the scent of roses still drifting in from the garden. Evelyn stirred once, coughing in her sleep, and Clara rushed to check on her. The frail woman smiled faintly, calling Clara by her mother's name before drifting back to dreams. That slip cut deeply, a reminder of Evelyn's vulnerability and how close her parents might be to exploiting it. Returning to her room, Clara pressed play on the recording, listening again to her father's chilling assurance. If Clara resists, we will brand her as manipulative. No judge will believe her over us. The words filled her with both terror and clarity. This was no longer speculation. It was war declared in whispers, and she could not afford to face it unprepared. Her eyes lifted to the window once more, where the moonlight bathed the garden in pale silver. Beyond the gate, the world seemed peaceful, but within the Whitmore estate, treachery thrived. Clara understood then that vigilance alone was not enough. She needed allies, strategies, and ironclad protection. The law would be her weapon, truth her shield. She turned off the lamp, but her mind remained alight, plotting silently as the night carried on. Clara clutches her phone, realizing she recorded part of the conversation proof of betrayal, but dangerous to reveal too soon. Clara sits in Helen Grant's office, sliding over financial documents while whispering, "I think my parents are planning to steal everything." The words felt heavy in her throat, as though speaking them out loud gave shape to a nightmare she had tried to dismiss. For nights she had carried the burden in silence, listening to the whispers in the garden, replaying the cold laughter of her parents and Sabrina plotting to gut the estate. Now, sitting beneath the tall shelves of law books, the air faintly scented with lemon polish, she faced it squarely. Betrayal was no longer suspicion. It was fact. Her grandfather had taught her that the strongest defenses are often invisible. Helen seemed to echo that wisdom now. "The best protections are built quietly," the elder law attorney said, her voice calm, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. "They won't even realize until it's too late." This was the chapter of her life where fear had to give way to action. Clara's goal was no longer to watch from the shadows. It was to lock down her grandparents' legacy beyond the reach of manipulation. The small office in Ashford was nothing like the Whitmore estate. Its carpets were worn, its windows fogged by the cool spring air. Yet to Clara it felt safer than her own home. The estate, with its wide staircases and glittering chandeliers, was a stage where betrayal unfolded. Here, surrounded by law books and paper files, Clara felt anchored in the language of justice. Helen sat behind her desk, flipping through the Whitmore financial records. Your instincts are sound. Your father's bankruptcy history, your mother's ventures, they show a clear pattern of exploitation. The danger is real. But there is one tool that can secure everything: an irrevocable trust. Clara nodded. It removes the assets from probate, yes? Exactly, Helen said. It places the estate outside the reach of any forged will or sudden claim. Your grandparents remain beneficiaries during their lifetimes, but once they pass, you, as trustee, carry out their wishes. No one, not even blood relatives, can override that. At that moment, Evelyn shuffled in, guided gently by Margaret Cole, the caretaker. Her steps were small, her eyes clouded with the fog of age. But when Helen explained the trust, Evelyn's hand tightened on Clara's. For Clara, she whispered, her voice quivering, and for Edward. The paperwork stretched across the desk, pages heavy with legal gravity. Evelyn's pen trembled as she signed, each signature a line of defense against Gregory's schemes. Margaret stood witness, her knitting abandoned in her lap, tears welling in her eyes. Clara pressed her lips together, the enormity of what was happening settling over her. She was no longer just a granddaughter. She was becoming the guardian of a legacy. Once the signatures dried, Helen gave her clear instructions. Copies will be secured here. One at the bank, one in your possession. Keep them in separate locations. Never let a single point of failure exist. And Clara, say nothing to your parents. Silence is your strongest ally. Back at the estate, Clara moved with quiet purpose. She carried the documents to the study, locking them in Edward's heavy safe before driving to the bank the next morning. Her hands shook as she slid the envelope across the counter to the manager, who nodded with solemn understanding. Your grandparents trusted me for years, he told her. Their wishes will be honored. The relief was real, but so was the fear, for already the cracks were showing. That evening, Margaret reported in hushed tones that Diane had cornered Evelyn in the parlor, asking slyly about papers she had signed recently. Evelyn, confused, had stammered something about protecting Clara, which Diane had dismissed with a patronizing smile. Clara's stomach churned. It was proof that her parents were sniffing around, aware that something had shifted. The trust was ironclad in law, but her family's persistence could still create chaos. She knew she would need allies beyond Helen, and so she called Daniel Cross, her colleague from the firm, a man whose reputation in fraud cases was unmatched. He listened carefully, his voice steady. "Bring me everything," he said. "If they're forging documents, we'll catch it. If they push, we'll push harder." That night, Clara sat by her grandmother's bedside, Evelyn humming a broken hymn as she drifted in and out of sleep. The old woman's hand was small and fragile in hers. Clara whispered, "You are safe, Grandma. They cannot touch this house now." Yet as reassuring as the words sounded, Clara knew the war was not over. It had only shifted into a higher gear. The trust was her fortress, but her parents would not retreat so easily. Her fear was confirmed the next evening. The sound of tires crunched on the gravel driveway, and when Clara opened the front door, Gregory stood there, his smile thin, a folder tucked beneath his arm. Diane hovered behind him, her expression painted with false sympathy, and Sabrina leaned lazily against the porch railing, her eyes alight with smug confidence. Gregory's voice was smooth, practiced, the kind he used when selling a lie. "Good evening, Clara. We found something you'll want to see. Right on time to witness your departure. I see my father called out as they approached the front walk. I hope you are packed and ready to go." The words struck Clara like cold steel. She had expected hostility, but not the brazen arrogance with which Gregory announced himself on the steps of the Whitmore estate. He carried a folder, his fingers drumming against it like a man certain of victory. Diane followed, her face arranged in a mask of forced sympathy, her designer sunglasses pushed up onto her hair. Sabrina trailed behind, practically skipping, her phone already in hand as if she were documenting a triumph. Clara remembered the days of whispered plotting in the garden, the late-night voices planning how to brand her as manipulative, how to paint her as an opportunist. Tonight's goal was clear. They were here to enforce their claim, to intimidate her into surrender. But she had prepared for this. She had fortified the estate with locks, cameras, and most importantly, law. The morning had been bright and deceptively calm. Clara had awakened before dawn, showered, and dressed in her navy suit, fastening the pearl earrings Evelyn had given her at graduation. She brewed strong coffee for herself and for her allies. By mid-morning, Daniel Cross, Helen Grant, and Marissa Delgado had assembled inside the house, reviewing documents, checking the injunction, ready for what was about to unfold. Margaret baked cinnamon rolls in the kitchen, their scent drifting through the rooms like a reminder of the home's warmth amid the gathering storm. Neighbors had gathered discreetly by the hedges, sensing that drama was about to explode. The black SUV pulled up, followed by a rumbling moving truck that double-parked on the narrow street. Two men stepped down, glancing nervously toward the imposing Victorian porch. The show was about to begin, with the estate as its stage. Clara stood tall at the top of the steps. "Before you come any further," she said calmly, her voice carrying across the lawn, "you should know this property is under video and audio surveillance. Everything you say or do will be recorded. There are witnesses inside." Gregory's smile faltered, just briefly. He recovered quickly, holding up the folder. "Always the dramatic one. This changes nothing. We have documents proving ownership. The house belongs to me." Clara's heart thudded, but she didn't flinch. "You mean your forged documents? The ones you believe override an irrevocable trust signed while both my grandparents were alive and fully competent?" For a flicker of a second, Diane's painted smile broke. Sabrina hesitated, glancing nervously between her parents. Gregory's jaw tightened. He climbed 2 steps toward Clara, towering over the rail. "Now you listen here. This house is mine. My parents wanted me to have it. Whatever you tricked them into signing when they were sick doesn't change that." The door behind Clara opened, and Daniel Cross stepped onto the porch with composed precision. Helen and Marissa followed, their folders in hand, with Patricia, the notary public, at their side. Margaret stood just inside, flour still dusting her apron, watching with quiet resolve. Daniel spoke evenly. "Mr. Whitmore, I am Daniel Cross, attorney for the Whitmore Family Trust. I believe you are about to accuse your daughter of undue influence and fraud. Please continue. We are recording for the court." The sight of 5 professionals assembled, every one of them prepared, brought Gregory to a halt. His face reddened, his mouth opening and closing. Diane tugged at his arm, whispering urgently. The moving men shifted uncomfortably, their eyes on the ground. "Perhaps you should tell the movers they won't be needed today," Clara said softly. Gregory's voice rose, desperate now. "This is ridiculous. I have legal rights. I have documentation right here." He waved the folder again, but his hand trembled. Marissa stepped forward, calm and precise. "An injunction was filed yesterday prohibiting any property transfers related to this estate. Presenting forged documents to a financial institution is a felony, punishable by prison time." She held up the stamped order, its seal catching the sunlight. Color drained from Gregory's face. Diane tried a new tactic, stepping forward with her sweetest tone. "Clara, darling, this is all a misunderstanding. Let us discuss it privately. We only want what's best for the family." "There is nothing to discuss," Clara replied firmly. "Grandmother and grandfather established the Whitmore Family Trust to protect their assets. Their wishes are final. Anything you claim otherwise is fraudulent." Gregory's voice cracked into rage. "This is not over. I'll drag this to the Supreme Court if I have to. Everyone will know what you did." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening frivolous lawsuits and defamation?" "Because that, Mr. Whitmore, constitutes harassment." the movers finally approached. "Sir," one said cautiously, "are we moving anything or not?" "We're on the clock." Gregory's fury bubbled. "You ungrateful child. After everything we've done for you." Clara laughed incredulously. "Everything you've done for me? You abandoned me. Grandmother and grandfather raised me. They gave me love, values, everything that mattered. You only showed up when you wanted something." Sabrina, pale now, lowered her phone, no longer recording. Even she seemed shaken by the exposure of their hypocrisy. Clara pulled out her phone, pressing play on the recording she had captured weeks earlier in the garden. Gregory's voice spilled into the air, clear and damning. "Once the old man is gone, we need to move quickly. Mom will sign whatever we put in front of her. If Clara resists, we'll offer her a small portion or contest everything. Who would believe her over us? The real children." Neighbors gasped. Diane paled. Gregory's face turned purple with rage. "That's illegal. You can't record without consent." Helen stepped forward. "Massachusetts law permits recording when a party consents." Clara was present. Perfectly legal. The police cars rolled up just then, lights flashing quietly. Officers stepped out, summoned by concerned neighbors. Clara explained calmly, the lawyers presenting documents, the injunction, the trust papers. Gregory realized the futility. His voice dropped to a venomous hiss. "This is not over, Clara. Family should never treat family this way." Clara's eyes burned with a steady fire. "On that, we agree completely." The police officers looked on, neighbors whispering in the background, the moving truck driver shaking his head. The confrontation had ended, but its wounds were far from healed. The officers asked if there was a problem. Clara answered with poise, her legal team handing over proof. Her parents and sister retreated, the SUV door slamming. The movers drove away, unused. As the vehicles rolled down the street, silence fell over the porch. Margaret placed a flour-dusted hand on Clara's shoulder and whispered, "Your grandparents would be proud." Clara exhaled slowly, standing in the same place where her grandfather had once told her, "Your word is your bond." Tonight, she had kept that bond. But the war was not done. Gregory had hissed his warning with the venom of a man who would strike again. The color of the afternoon dimmed as shadows stretched across the estate, and Clara knew this was only one battle in a longer war. Defeated but still defiant, my parents and sister returned to their SUV. The moving truck pulled away, its mission unfulfilled. The officers asked if there was a problem. Clara explained briefly that her family had made incorrect assumptions about property ownership and that everything was under control. But as the patrol cars pulled away and neighbors returned to their homes, the adrenaline that had steadied her now ebbed, leaving Clara shaken. She had faced her parents head-on, exposed their lies in public, and forced them to retreat. But Gregory's parting words lingered like smoke. "This is not over." She remembered the night in the garden when he had laughed about branding her manipulative about dragging her name through the mud until no one believed her. That foreshadowing now felt closer than ever. The confrontation at the porch had not ended, though where it had lit the fuse for the next attack. The goal of this chapter was not victory, but endurance. Clara had won the battle, but the fallout was already beginning, and she would need to brace herself against new tactics, threats, slander, and schemes designed not to seize the estate but to destroy her. The estate itself felt different in the aftermath. The afternoon light fell across the porch, illuminating the documents still stacked neatly on the side table, evidence of the trust's strength. Inside, Margaret moved silently, cleaning up the dishes left from the morning preparations, her cinnamon rolls untouched in the kitchen. The house was safe for now, but its silence carried the weight of strain. Every creak of the stairs, every rustle of branches outside, seemed to whisper, "Danger is not gone." Clara gathered her allies in the library. Daniel Cross, Helen Grant, and Marissa Delgado sat with her around the heavy oak table. Patricia, the notary, had already departed, but her presence remained in the signed injunctions and sealed affidavits. Margaret brought in coffee, her hands steady though her eyes betrayed concern. "They will not stop," Daniel said flatly. "Forgers rarely fold after a single exposure. They regroup. They escalate." Helen nodded. "We must file for a permanent record of the trust in the court archives. That way, even if they attempt to slip fraudulent deeds into the registry, the conflict will be immediately flagged." Marissa leaned forward, her tone sharp. "And we prepare for litigation. If they harass you again through defamation, through false lawsuits, we strike back, preemptively if possible." Clara listened, her mind drifting briefly to her grandmother's frail face. Evelyn had always said, "A woman must stand on her own feet, especially when others try to knock her down." The phrase echoed now like a call to arms. The next days confirmed Daniel's prediction. A voicemail arrived from Gregory, first dripping with honey, offering to resolve things quietly, then turning bitter you have no idea who you're dealing with. Diane sent an email addressed to neighbors, claiming Clara had manipulated her grandparents into signing papers while they were in failing health. Sabrina posted on social media, accusing Clara of being a selfish opportunist, tagging relatives and family friends. Clara felt the sting, but she also felt her resolve harden. For every attack, she gathered evidence. For every slanderous word, she prepared rebuttals. Daniel helped draft a cease and desist letter. Helen secured additional testimony from Margaret, and Marissa filed paperwork to flag any fraudulent claims that might appear. Yet the climax of this fallout came not through paper or digital words, but through a brazen act. On a Thursday afternoon, Gregory and Diane appeared unannounced at Clara's law firm. They marched into the reception area demanding to speak to her. Clara was in court at the time, and the receptionist politely explained. But her parents refused to leave, their voices rising, Gregory shouting about betrayal, Diane accusing the firm of harboring a thief. Security was called. They were escorted out, their faces crimson with humiliation. When Clara returned later, her colleagues surrounded her with concern. "We're with you," one said firmly. The senior partners, usually reserved, offered their support, impressed by her composure in the storm. In the strangest way, Gregory and Diane's spectacle had strengthened Clara's position. Their desperation was showing. That evening she sat once more on the porch swing, the spring air cool against her skin. Margaret joined her quietly, pressing a cup of tea into her hand. "You're not alone in this," she said softly. Clara nodded, though in her heart the ache of betrayal pulsed. She was not a daughter in her parents' eyes, she was an obstacle. Her mind replayed every moment of the confrontation. Gregory's rage, Diane's false sweetness, Sabrina's recording phone trembling when the truth was revealed. She wondered if they felt shame, if they understood the damage they had done. But deep down, she knew the answer. Greed had blinded them too deeply. The estate was intact, her grandparents' wishes protected, but the family bond was shattered beyond repair. And still, Gregory's hissed promise lingered. This is not over. Clara checked the locks again before retiring for the night. She reviewed the camera footage, reassured by the glowing red lights of security. In the library, she placed fresh copies of the injunction and trust documents into a fireproof safe. Every precaution mattered now, yet safety was never absolute. When she finally sat at her desk to catch her breath, her phone buzzed with a new voicemail. Gregory's voice snarled in her ear. "You may have won today, but I will not be humiliated. I'll ruin your reputation, Clara. I'll make the courts believe you manipulated two dying people for your own gain. Everyone will know who you really are." Her fingers tightened around the phone until her knuckles whitened. She exhaled slowly, pressing the device down on the desk. The threats no longer frightened her. They angered her, fueling the fire of determination. She would not let his words define her. Clara rose, walking back to the porch where Edward's favorite chair sat empty. She lowered herself onto the swing, listening to the faint creak of the chains. The night was calm, the sky scattered with stars. Yet inside her, the storm gathered strength. She whispered into the quiet, "You wanted me to protect this, Grandpa. I won't fail you." Her vow hung in the air like a promise sealed. Living alone in the house that had once been filled with her grandparents' warmth and wisdom was both a comfort and a source of pain. Every room held memories. Sometimes I see their names in my email spam folder or notice a missed call from an unknown number that might be theirs. The line lingered in Clara's mind as she sorted through her inbox one spring morning, the sunlight spilling across the long dining table where Evelyn used to serve Sunday dinners. Gregory's threats had gone quiet. Sabrina's angry social media posts had stopped. Diane's accusations had faded into silence. Yet the absence of noise carried its own weight, a foreshadowing of the distance that had settled between her and those who shared her blood. It was the silence of finality, of a tie severed. The goal of this moment was not to fight another battle, but to reflect on what had been lost and what had been preserved. Clara's war had ended not with a courtroom verdict or a police raid, but with her own decision to hold the line, to defend her grandparents' wishes, and to accept that sometimes justice meant letting go. The estate stood serene now, restored to quiet dignity. Spring flowers bloomed in the garden Evelyn had loved, their colors vibrant against the dark iron fence. The house no longer carried the echo of shouting matches or the tremble of deceit. Instead, it carried the gentle hum of life moving forward. Clara had made changes, small renovations to blend the old with the new. Edward's library remained intact, his books lining the shelves, his chair polished but still bearing the shape of his presence. Evelyn's kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon and nutmeg, though Clara had added modern appliances. A scholarship fund now bore their names, a living tribute that connected their legacy to the futures of young law students. The characters of this chapter were not her parents, not her sister, but the allies who had become her chosen family. Daniel Cross still checked in often, his wife Naomi insisting Clara join them for holiday dinners. Helen Grant sent notes on anniversaries of the trust signing. Her professional distance softened into friendship. Marissa Delgado dropped by with coffee, updating Clara on other estate battles she was winning across the county, often saying, "Your case gave me fire for these fights." And Margaret, dear Margaret, still came twice a week, tending the roses, baking bread, humming the same tunes Evelyn once hummed. Yet the memories remained, heavy but softened by time. Clara would sometimes walk the halls at night, pausing before the portraits of Edward and Evelyn. She could still hear their voices. Edward telling her, "Your word is your bond." Evelyn reminding her, "A woman must stand on her own feet." They were gone, but their lessons had rooted deeply, guiding her through each moment of betrayal, each decision to fight back. The plot of her life had shifted. Where once she had been the granddaughter living under her grandparents' care, now she was the steward of their legacy. Where once she had feared the cunning of Gregory and Diane, now she had learned to anticipate, to prepare, to trust her own strength. And where once she had grieved the loss of family, now she had learned that family could be chosen, shaped by loyalty and love rather than blood. The climax of this quiet chapter came unexpectedly, in the form of a small envelope delivered with the morning mail. There was no return address. Inside, a single folded sheet. The handwriting was Sabrina's. "I am sorry for what happened. They were wrong. I was wrong. I miss you." Clara read the words again and again, her hands trembling not with fear, but with something more complex in ache that was part anger, part relief, part longing. For so long, Sabrina had been her parents' echo, their accomplice. To see even a small crack in that alliance felt like a twist of fate. She sat at her desk, staring at the letter for hours, the estate quiet around her. Finally, she pulled a sheet of stationery from the drawer and wrote only a brief reply. "Thank you for saying that. It matters." She sealed it without a return invitation, leaving the door slightly open, but no wider than she could bear. The cliffhanger of her journey was not one of fear or danger, but of possibility. Would Sabrina ever return, seeking redemption? Would Gregory and Diane fade into obscurity, or rise again with new schemes? Clara did not know, but she had made peace with uncertainty. Evening fell, and Clara took her place on the porch swing, the chains creaking softly as the spring air wrapped around her. The garden glowed with color, Margaret's care evident in every bloom. In the distance, church bells rang, the same bells that had tolled at Edward's funeral. She closed her eyes, imagining him beside her, Evelyn humming in the kitchen, the house alive with the warmth of family. She whispered into the dusk, "I did it. I kept the promise." Her chosen family would gather again soon, Daniel and Naomi with laughter, Helen with her sharp wit, Marissa with her stories, Margaret with fresh bread. Together, they had filled the void her parents left, proving that loyalty and love were not confined to bloodlines. The Whitmore estate stood, not as a prize seized by greed, but as a sanctuary preserved by honor. It was more than a house. It was proof that betrayal could be met with resilience, that justice could live in quiet acts, and that the truest revenge was not destruction but preservation. Clara still sat on the porch swing some evenings, especially in spring, when the garden her grandmother loved burst into bloom. The house no longer felt empty but filled with both memories and new possibilities. The trust her grandparents had established protected more than just property. It preserved a foundation from which she could rebuild and grow after loss. For anyone who might one day face similar betrayal, Clara's story offered a lesson etched in her very bones. Standing firm against those who would take advantage of the vulnerable was not selfish. It was courage. It was love. And with that knowledge, Clara looked toward the horizon, knowing her fight was done, her promise kept, and her future still unfolding. In the end, Clara's story was not only about legal battles or forged documents. It was about what happens when the very people meant to protect us become the ones who betray us. Her journey carried the weight of every broken promise, every whispered scheme, and every false smile her parents and sister brought into her life. Yet it also carried the resilience of a young woman determined to keep her word and honor the people who raised her with love and integrity. Family at its core should be the anchor that steadies us in life's storms. But Clara learned what so many others discover painfully: blood alone does not guarantee loyalty. Her parents saw the Whitmore estate as a prize, a possession to exploit, while Clara saw it as a legacy of love and sacrifice. That contrast revealed the truth, the difference between greed and gratitude, between entitlement and honor. The moral of her story shines clearly. Betrayal may come wrapped in family ties, but loyalty is proven through actions, not titles. Justice is not always loud or triumphant. Sometimes it is quiet, steady, and unyielding. Clara did not seek revenge in the form of destruction. Her revenge was preservation. She ensured her grandparents' legacy survived untarnished, proving that the strongest victories are those that protect rather than destroy. We are reminded that true family can be chosen. Clara found hers not in Gregory, Diane, or Sabrina, but in the people who stood by her, the lawyers who defended her, the caretaker who never wavered, the friends who filled her empty holidays with warmth. That is the real lesson. Family is made of loyalty, honesty, and love, no matter where it comes from. The image of Clara sitting on the porch swing as spring flowers bloomed again is a picture of quiet triumph. She had faced betrayal, humiliation, and threats, but she never wavered. She turned her grief into strength, her fear into vigilance, her isolation into a new kind of belonging. And by doing so, she honored Edward and Evelyn's faith in her completely. Even Sabrina's small note of apology showed that truth has power. Greed may shout loudly, but conscience whispers longer. Perhaps in time, that whisper will grow into redemption. Perhaps not. Either way, Clara's life was no longer defined by what her parents tried to take, but by what she chose to preserve. Her journey teaches us that no inheritance is worth more than integrity, and no betrayal can erase the power of loyalty kept. Money fades, property changes hands, but the memory of how we stood in the face of injustice endures for generations. Clara became not only the guardian of a house, but of a philosophy, that courage and love are stronger than greed and deceit. And so, philosophy remains. True wealth lies not in possessions, but in loyalty, justice, and the love of those who never abandon you. If this story spoke to you, leave the words number 1 in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to hear the next powerful story of family betrayal, hidden secrets, and the courage it takes to seek justice.